Now here we are going to address points which further conclude that God's covenant was indeed through Isaac after Abraham and not Ishmael. Now as we see here, Surah Al-Baqarah in the Quran is a direct message to the children of Israel, stating to fulfill your covenant with God, and it shall fulfill its covenant with us. Now it is more than noteworthy that even in the Quran you see a specific reference to God's covenant with the children of Israel, and within the Quran you do not even have a mention of Ishmael's 12 princes, and there is no mention of any covenant being with Ishmael even within the Quran. As far as Ishmael is concerned, it states, and mentioned in the book Ishmael, indeed he was true to his promise. Now that promise was to make sacrifices and keep prayers within his family, which they did indeed do, according to what we have here. However, there was still no covenant from God outside of Ishmael's 12 princes and becoming a great nation. I cannot emphasize enough that literally you do not have one single prince of Ishmael's named within the Quran. However, you do have children of Isaac through Jacob named throughout it. Now there are 22 generations from Adam to Jacob, Israel. This is a display of God's divine orchestration of order throughout creation, as there are 22 acts of creation, just as there are 22 letters in the Hebrew alphabet. Now we see children of Israel, such as Moses and David, named throughout the Quran, but once more, not a single child of Ishmael. A common argument is that the firstborn receives a blessing over the second. However, we see that God has laid out a particular pattern here, showing us that it is ultimately it that decides. Just as with Cain and Abel, we see the same with Ishmael and Isaac, as was with Esau and Jacob, Israel, and as was with Manasseh and Ephraim. Further signature is the fact that just as each one of those brothers that we just named were each in pairs, two, we see that the children of Israel were also born in twos.
The tribes that were born in an order of doubles, of twos, all of the tribes were born in twos. First Reuven, Shimon, then Levi, Yehuda is two, altogether it's four. Then come the two sons of Bilhah, then the two sons of Zilpah, then another two sons of Leah, then the two sons of Rachel. the model of the birth of the tribes is twos.
Another argument which was placed forward is that in Genesis 15, where God first promises Abraham that he will have an heir of his own flesh and blood, is that Isaac was not born yet at the time of this promise. However, neither was Ishmael. Now at the end of chapter 16, the following chapter, Ishmael is born through Hagar. Now, throughout this entire chapter and the previous chapter, of course, God being all-knowing, it must stick out that there was not a single statement in regards to how to uphold the covenant that God was making with Abraham. In fact, in chapter 17, God indeed promises Ishmael will have 12 princes and become a great nation. However, that its covenant it will establish with Isaac. Further proof of God making absolutely clear to us that this covenant is through Isaac is the fact that God, being all-knowing, waited until after Ishmael was born to give the orders as to upholding the covenant, including the circumcision of a baby at 8 days old. It could have stated that in chapter 15 in that time frame, however waited until Ishmael was born, and Isaac is the first recorded baby to be circumcised at 8 days old, while Ishmael was 13. Again, this being no mistake and God making clear the covenant is indeed with Yitzhak, Isaac. Furthermore, it is clear in chapter 17 that there is a complete change which takes place. Abram's name is changed to Abraham. Sarai's name is changed to Sarah. Zara. And then after that, instructions in which to uphold the covenant are given. And in desperation, the argument was put forward that Isaac did not actually come from Abraham's bowels. Now we see that in chapter 21, according to Sarah's account, the only thing abnormal to her when it came to the birth of Isaac was the age of both her and Abraham. As here we are speaking of those that knew as clear as just about any other that all comes from God, Yahweh. Just as in Genesis chapter 4, verse 1, Eve accredits God for its help in having a son. There was also some confusion as to whether or not we are the angels spoken of throughout the Bible by the grace of God. And you see in Genesis chapter 18, Abraham is visited by 3 men. In the following chapter, 2 of those men go to Sodom and in the first verse are introduced as angels. The fact that we are indeed God's angels is made all the more clear in the Jubilees creation fragment of the Dead Sea Scrolls, fragment 4Q 216, makes clear that in the segment of time where in Genesis God states, "Let us make," in that segment of time God is speaking to us, its angels, as is clear within the Jubilees creation, as is clear within the creation fragment 4Q 216. It was also asked in a conversation in which I destroyed those who tried to actually oppose the truth that is Yahweh's covenant is indeed through Isaac unto Jacob and the children of Israel. They asked, how is it that we can connect these biblical records to Moses himself? Now Moses lived during 1446 BCE, which is the date of the Exodus. And when you calculate the information given in 1 Kings chapter 6, verse 1, it indeed calculates back to 1446 BCE, aligning the biblical records as historically accurate. Now that we have clarified those facts, such as not one of Ishmael's 12 princes are listed within the Quran, however, you do have children of Jacob listed throughout the Quran. As well as in chapter 29, verse 27 of the Quran, it states, "And we gave him," speaking of Abraham, "Isaac and Jacob, and we appointed the prophecy and the book to be among his seed." And once more, it is in fact clear that within the Dead Sea Scrolls, the oldest copies of the Bible in the world, in Genesis chapter 17, verses 18 and 19, state very clearly that the covenant is indeed through Isaac, Yitzhak. Now unto further proof that time has come full circle, further highlighting that it is indeed with the children of Israel which God has established its covenant. In the Quran, the word day appears 365 times, which shows to be correct. The word month occurs 12 times in the Quran. However, as we are about to see here, on top of further proof of Genesis chapter 11, verse 1, that the world was of one language, our original history, as the original calendar of the human being, the original calendar of the angel, is 364 days. This is the calendar that was taught to Enoch by his fathers, his mothers before him, the seventh patriarch since Adam. This is the calendar that was held through the Davidic kingdom, as King David, also one of the fathers of my line, wrote 364 songs to commemorate every single day of the year. This is the calendar that was held by those at Qumran, as it is found throughout the Dead Sea Scrolls. And not only is the calendar still in use to this very day, still modeled after the blueprint in Genesis, whereas there are 7 days as like the 7 days of creation. But still, when you look at the calendar, you will notice that Sunday is actually the first day, Monday is the second day, and it continues on until the Sabbath, the 7th day. And not only is our original calendar divisible by 7, but you are about to see proof that the whole earth was of one language, as the pyramid, renowned to be a calendar-made castle, reflects this very calendar, the original calendar of the human being, of the angel, by the grace of God. And as you see here, the Maya elders hold that the phenomena which happens upon the equinox represent the 7 days of creation, as you see here.
In the Dead Sea Scrolls, we have numerous documents who are talking about solar calendar, of pre-calculated calendar emerging, commencing in the spring. While the Jewish calendar, known to all of you who are following the Jewish calendar, is starting in the autumn. The current Jewish calendar is starting in the autumn, in the month of Tishrei, while the biblical calendar states explicitly that the calendar starts in the spring. In the book of Exodus 12, we are told that the calendar is commencing in the month of the spring, the first month of the year, where the year is starting as a divine declaration of the beginning of freedom, of the epoch of freedom. It is given up in the time where the story of the departure from Egypt, the exodus from Egypt, then there is a calendar introduced, and it is said, this month, the month of the spring, is the head of the year, or the first of the month. You would always start to count from the first month. Is the presence of a solar calendar, a calendar which the writers ascribe to a mythical ancient past. The people who had authored the book of First Enoch, it's called the Ethiopian Enoch because it was first known to us in the language of Giz, which is an Ethiopian language, Semitic Ethiopian language. In the book of Enoch, chapter 72-82, is telling us in great detail on the calendar of 364 days. In the book of Psalms that had been found in Qumran, entirely different genre, you know, Psalms. In the extra Psalms, those which are not known to us in the Bible, in the Psalm scrolls which is presented in the shrine of the book, in column 27 we are told that David, king of Israel, the one who had been described as wise and as poetically gifted and as a prophet according to this scroll, had authored 364 daily songs for each day of the year. He further had authored 52 sacred songs for every one of the Sabbaths of the years. He further authored 18 special songs for the holidays of the year. Now, in entirely different kind of genre, let's say the book of Jubilees, which is para-biblical because it is retelling the book of Genesis. In the book of Jubilees, we are told that Noah had stayed in the ark 364 days, which are divided equally to 4 seasons of 91 days, commencing in the spring. The same is true for the scroll of priestly watches, which is worked on a calendar of 364 days. The same is true to a letter called Miktzat Maaseh Torah, a few observations on the acts of the Torah. The scroll is commencing with a calendar telling us that the first week of the year starts in the spring And there are 52 weeks in every year, and in each week a different priestly scroll is serving according to a calendar of 364 days. Now, the centrality of the solar calendar could not be exaggerated in the library of Qumran. As I said, in various different genres, in various different literary modes, the centrality of the calendar is put forward. It was a priestly calendar, divided according to the priestly sevenfold divisions. Because if there was anything sacred to the priestly calendar, it was the following assertion: the covenant between God and his people is based on the following fact: every 7 day one should not work on a Sabbath. Every 7 holidays of the first 7 months of the year, one must refrain from work according to the biblical law.
Just as any loving parent would do for you, in time you find out that what was commanded of you was ultimately for your own good. And beautifully, science shows that aspects of our biology, our very bodies, operates on a 7-day cycle. And to say the least, once more, this calendar, this 7-day cycle has been passed down since Adam and Eve, ultimately passed on to Moses, who passed it on once again to the Israelites, the Hebrews in the desert. Now, the subject matters addressed in this video came from a live conversation in which those that were against me were just completely, utterly destroyed. And ultimately, by the grace of God itself, it chose to save them whatever embarrassment, as this turned out to be about a 3-hour work along the lines of the last few videos that I made. But it ultimately was erased, as God would have it. So, of course, there will be a third temple built by the grace of God. And if there are any out there whom represent Islam, let alone a scholar, whom think they can address any of what was placed forward here, you are more than challenged to step forward against the actual line of Christ by the grace of God. Yud He, Vav He.